Welcome. My name is Sarah Higgins. I'm the Advocacy and Education Manager for the Washington Wine Growers Association. Wine Growers serves the industry through education and state and federal advocacy for vineyard and winery operations, and we are pleased to be able to partner with WSU today to bring you this 90-minute webinar. Before we get started, I've got a few housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded for future use, and we will send the recording to you and make it available on our websites in the coming days. To both facilitate a quality recording and to help keep our time within the targeted 90-minute duration, we have muted all the participants. Hosts and presenters will also be on mute when not speaking. In addition to some pre-identified topics that our speakers will cover today, we invite you to engage in the discussion as well. There are a couple of options to do so. So first, regarding Zoom's chat feature at the bottom of your screen, which I'm sure by now you're probably very familiar with, please reserve that for either technical issues that you may be having or to be able to communicate with your fellow attendees. Our speakers won't necessarily be engaging in the chat box, but Julie behind the scenes can help with tech issues, and we certainly encourage you to interact with one another there. Also at the bottom of your screen, you will find a Q&A button. And that is where we would like you to focus your comments and questions directed specifically to the presenters. We have set that up so that everyone can see it, but then we will walk through in kind of a specific order of addressing those, and our moderator will be helping us with that. You can also text your comments and questions to our moderator at 509-788-5459. That's 788-5459. And finally, don't worry if your question doesn't get answered during today's webinar. The recording that we send out can be accompanied with a Q&A list if that proves to be something that's needed. So our moderator for today is Gwen Hoheisel from Washington State University. She's a regional extension specialist. Gwen works with grape, berry, and tree fruit growers in sustainable pest management, application technology, and horticulture. So we thank Gwen for joining us today. We thank WSU for partnering. We appreciate your time helping us learn and implement compliant practices. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Gwen.
Great, thank you. So what we thought we would do is to start off and allow each panelist to introduce themselves for 5 minutes and give a little overview on their job, their position, and a little bit of what they've done. And then we're going to turn it in. We have some questions, and we've grouped them basically into some categories of general management, harvest decisions in the field, harvest decisions in the winery, and worker management. And so with that, I'd like to just get started and go with introductions and allow them to do it. So I'll start with Faith from WSU, and then we'll go David and Sadie, Jason, Jim, and Julie. Becca.
Great. Thanks, Gwen. My name is Faith Kreitzer. I'm the Produce Safety Extension Specialist and Associate Professor at WSU. I am based at IREC in Central Washington or Eastern Washington. And in my role as a food microbiologist, I've been providing support to people who have questions about sanitizers and disinfectants, what they should be using, what they shouldn't be using, and then, as they're evaluating different tools to deal with COVID, what is the best route for them going forward. So that's the expertise I'll be sharing with the group today through your questions.
Good, thank you. David.
Hi there, my name is Dave Conley. I am the DOSH Consultation Manager for the Department of Labor and Industries. I serve the counties of Snohomish, Skagit, Whatcom Island, and San Juan. I've been with the department for about 10 years now. My background, I'm a farm kid from the Skagit Valley. So I grew up in Mount Vernon, went to Western for college, and then I spent most of my time in the construction industry as a construction safety specialist expert. And then kind of when I came to the Department of Labor and Industries, I was able to kind of use my skills as a construction person and with an agriculture background, and I'm in the consultation program now. So if you're not familiar with DOS consultation, what we do is we work with employers who ask for our help, essentially. We want to make sure that people know, especially employers, that you have a resource with the Department of Labor and Industries in our consultation program. It's a free service that we offer, and I have risk managers who deal with things like claims and business best practices, how to save money, industrial insurance. I have industrial hygienists that deal with things that can make you sick, so like noise conservation, or in our current environment, COVID-19. And then I have safety specialists that handle more of the things that can get you hurt, like machine guarding, tractor safety, that type of thing. So again, it's a free service that we offer, and we love the fact that we're able to partner with you guys and make sure you understand that you've got a resource out there. We know we've got a harvest coming up, and we want to do everything from the department standpoint to make sure that that goes as smooth as possible, and help you guys make sure that you're as prepared as you possibly can be as we move forward. So happy to answer more questions as we go, but I think that's a good start for me, and we'll go on from there.
I think I'm next, so I'll just dive in.
Sadie, yep, sorry.
Yeah.
Sadie. I was like trying to get my mute button again.
So hi everybody, I'm Sadie Drury from North Slope Management. We are a vineyard management company that manages 8 vineyards. I'm a farm labor contractor. So we work in really high-end vineyards for the most part. Seven Hills Vineyards is probably the one that you know. And so everything, all the labor is done by hand. And I think this is important in talking about managing people. I hire about 40 to 50 different people each year to work on our crew. And it's been an interesting year so far, managing everything with COVID. Some of you guys may know that we actually had a COVID incident at my workplace, and our employee died. So I've been taking this very seriously from the start. And I'm excited to maybe answer some questions and share today what we're doing to keep everybody safe.
Good. Let's go to Jason.
This is Jason Gorski. I'm a director of winemaking and viticulture at the Little Cellars. What we're bringing to the conversation today is as a brand, we went from 4 locations to 1 over the past year. So we would have been maybe better suited for this in pods and separated a year ago. And as soon as we kind of got all together in a brand new facility, we're in the process of making sure that we separate ourselves again. So we're a mid-sized winery, about 30,000 cases. So we've got 10, 15 full-time employees in the tasting room, some in sales and admin, and then the winemaking team. And a lot of the conversation today will be about how our team will be growing on the winemaking side, and how we can bring on seasonal employees and make sure that everyone's staying safe and separated.
Good. So Jim, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to thank Washington State University and the Washington Wine Growers for inviting me to participate in today's webinar. I am Jim Warm, Director of Environmental Health and Safety Services for St. Michel. We operate a number of wineries and vineyards in California, Oregon, and Washington. And so I just look forward to the discussion today and everyone's questions.
Becca.
Hi everyone, I'm Becca from Four Feathers Wine Estate. I'm the GM and Director of Winemaking here. We're mostly custom crush. We do about 18,000 tons every year and take on 60 to 70 people during harvest. My company also grows and packs a lot of fruit, and today's the last day of cherry harvest. So we've learned a lot in that process. Yeah, yay, good for them. And we've learned a lot through cherry harvest and blueberry harvest, and we're actually going to take some of what they learned and implement that into our winery.
Whoops. Okay. So I just put in the chat box again because there's a few more people coming on. And when you are brand new, you couldn't see any of the old chats. But we are going to, there's two boxes. There's a chat box that you can reserve if you're having technical issues, and Julie will help you through those. Or if you want to say something to some other person, just be careful who you send it to. And then, but the Q&As, if you have any questions that you want answered, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And go ahead and type the question in there. And I have a list of questions. I'll fit it in where I think it's most appropriate. Okay? The only other option, if you're on the phone, I do see there are several attendees that are on the phone. You can always text me, which is 509-788-5459, because you won't see the chat box if you're on the phone. Okay? All right. So with that, what we thought we would start with, because there's everybody here with a lot of expertise and they have really thought about field and winery operations in the middle of COVID session. So we thought we would talk about just general management and ask Sadie and Becca, Jim and Jason, really to talk about what's the greatest operating challenge and how have you overcome it to deal with harvest and winery operations right now. So let's start with Sadie.
Hi again. I think the biggest challenge really is just what is sustainable, like what is going to keep everybody safe, what's economic, and what can we do long term. So I think coming up with a plan that people respected and wanted to do because it was sustainable and that was going to work for our company was for sure the biggest challenge. I had to move offices to try to get better internet, so I'm away from my cheat sheet at the moment, but yeah, it's been fascinating, and I think we found things that work. Initially, we would find things that didn't work very well, but eventually, you know, all these months into it, we are able to find something that's working financially and then is keeping people safe and people are respecting.
Okay, so Sadie, we'll let you off the hook here. We'll ask you details. I know you're going to share a lot, but that'll give you a chance to go back and get your cheat sheet. So let's go to Jim.
For us, for all of our locations, really the biggest challenge is maintaining a healthy workforce. Here in the Valley, you know, for a while, Yakima, Benton, Franklin were, you know, the hottest spots in the state, which led to a lot of people being isolated because they were testing positive, or they were quarantining because they're interacting or had interacted because of the protocols from the governor. They had to stay home. That impacted us. You know, it's people are making choices outside of the workplace that is impacting the workplace. And so I don't have a silver bullet for this. It's really been just communicating over and over again how our behaviors have to be consistent in the workplace and at home. And so we talk about this in our safety programs, that, you know, you can't be safe at work and follow safe protocols and then go home and mow your yard in flip-flops and no earplugs or safety glasses. And so you really have to have this mentality, whether you're at work or whether you're at home. And it's trying to drive that message with all of our employees when it comes to COVID-19. Face coverings is very important. Social distancing is absolutely important. Washing your hands, following all those basic protocols is trying to get everyone to adopt these and follow them at all times.
So Becca, what about you? What was some of the greater challenges you've faced so far?
So my company is headquartered in Sela, and they did something interesting early on. They took a poll of their production workers and asked them if they wanted people to wear masks on the production floor well before it became required. And majority of the people wanted that. And I think pushback and not proper social distancing, that was pretty hard at first, and it's still a challenge. You're always trying to make sure people are doing the right thing, but that poll really helped to buy in, I think, and it's kind of proof that, hey, this is what everybody wants, so let's do this and let's do it well. And then working from home is hard, and especially at the winery, that's you feel very disconnected. So trying to be connected is important. Learning how to do that.
Yeah, not all tasks can be done from home. So Jason, what is the biggest challenge that you faced right now, and how did you overcome it within your company?
I think for us, it's been the constant change state. I mean, again, building multiple, having multiple facilities come together, living with construction, and then we go straight into basically the business model changing almost, every day. Early on, it was, how do we shut down? Do we get PPP? How much do we have to cut salaries? Do we need to cut headcount? So a lot of it has really just kind of converted into basically all of us expecting there to be change every day and checking in with one another much more frequently, just to make sure that you're not going insane while dealing with the constant change. So even since we kind of last talked as a group, we went from our retail business being open and us doing really well to now facing not being able to have tasters inside. So it's kind of constantly changing how we do business and kind of how we focus on how do we keep moving forward.
So, Jim, did you, in your implementing new regulations, did you ever have anybody that wasn't on board with it, or how did you get your all the employees on board with the new requirements, and as Jason just said, a changing environment?
I'd say that's the biggest hurdle with people. It wasn't them pushing back on, maybe wearing the face covering or staggering their shift. It was more of us forcing them to change. They've done 15, 20, 30 harvests, and so they've always done it this way. And so now we're coming and we're saying, no, you have to do it differently. And so it's less of a pushback and more of breaking people out of their comfort zone and breaking them out of their shells of, this is how I've always done it. I can't change it. I don't want to change it. And so it's those habits that can't be sustained anymore, which is uncomfortable. People don't like change. And so they can see it as threatening. And so we're focusing on how to make it comfortable for them. And to Jason's point, the tasting rooms, we've seen a lot of changes in the tasting rooms. Curbside pickup, that wasn't a thing before. And now that's really how some wineries are even just trying to make some money, is just having that system. Going to appointment only, that wasn't a common thing. So some of the higher end tasting rooms would operate like that, but most tasting rooms operated as kind of an open house. People just came in. And you could have crowds, but now it's appointment only. That was a change for our tasting room staff to think that way, to operate that way, but it's actually beneficial. We're seeing the customers appreciate that personal, that one-on-one engagement with them, because we're spending more time with them. We're not dealing with a busy tasting bar. We've only got maybe 2 tables spread out across the tasting room, and so they get much better interaction with the guest services people. And so we have seen customers appreciate that. And so those are just, really, it's the change. It's Jason said, business models. You have to change your business model. The way you thought before is not going to work today.
So Becca, you said that your company's already done blueberry and cherry harvest. Did you get any pushback, and how are you all trying to learn from that and change, as Jim said, for wine grape harvest?
I'm not involved in the daily operations of blueberry and cherry harvest, so I I can't really speak to those, but I think it's empowering everyone to enforce the rules, especially your full-time and lead and assistant lead type positions, making sure that they know that we're taking this seriously and they are empowered to say, hey, put your mask back on, or hey, you guys, you were a little close right now, just back up, right? You can't do it alone, and you have to have as many people that know the rules and believe in the rules as possible. And that's just sitting down and talking with them and saying, I need you, I need your help.
Okay, so I just want to remind people that you can ask questions in the Q&A box. If you have any, and the Q&A is down at the bottom of your screen. So I want to ask some of the panelists now if there were additional stressors that the employees have experienced. It is that seems to be the cliche that it's a very stressful time. So Jason, why don't you start this one? You had a nice answer, actually, a nice way to frame it when we were talking at the start. So can you talk about any additional stressors and how you're specifically handling it with your staff?
The saying that I heard early on was that we're on the same storm, but not on the same boat. So just trying to be aware that not everyone has the same challenges during this time. Some people can work, and within my work, some people can work from home. Some people have childcare issues. Some people don't. Some people constantly have to come to work. Others can, be safer, separated. So really what we've really instituted is a lot more like mental health checks. I kind of check, every manager has been charged, not just to make sure that one another are doing okay, that every single employee is just, having a check-in, just making sure that people are doing okay. And then the thing I just kind of remind everybody that I talk to is the saying I had is just be human. And especially with the coming harvest, there's almost certainly going to be a time where either the winery or the trucking company or the growing operation are going to be affected. We have to admit that that's going to happen. And just like last year when people were getting upset because it got cold, well, the pandemic is the same thing. We don't control it. So it's just super important to understand that everyone's fighting their own battle and to make sure that we support each other. That's the only way we're going to get through this. And I was actually speaking with an employee of a different company who was really struggling the other day, and she brought up that, they made wine during the world wars. So I think, if this is our generation's challenge and all you got to do is wear a mask, I think we're going to be up for it. So it's not, waiting until the shelling stops and then going out to pick. It's literally just, trying to be as safe as you can and being mindful that we're going to be affected by this for the next year or so or longer. And the most important thing to do is to support each other during that.
So Jim, can you give some specific examples of stressors that you've seen in your company and how you're specifically dealing with that?
Okay. People experience or stress manifests differently for people. And so, prior to the pandemic, our everyday lives, if you look back on it, are easy compared to what we're, trying to navigate today. And so it's really, we have to stop and acknowledge that people are experiencing this differently and it's affecting them differently. And so some of the things we've done is changing schedules. And so if you could work from home, we're absolutely supporting you. Work from home. Managers are telling people work from home. That's strange because that's not how companies operated before. That's not how managers felt comfortable before. Managers wanted to see their people lined up in their workstation, getting things done. But when you can't do that, it was a little bit of a learning curve and stressful on the managers. So we've allowed people to work from home if they could, but that's not always a good thing. Not everyone's home situation is conducive to this. They've got a spouse working from home, they've got kids working from home, they've got other people living with them at home. And so, or their internet may not be strong enough. And so all of these things may detract from what appears to be a nice perk to be able to work from home. the other thing that managers have had to learn is to be flexible. We can't have rigid schedules. And so what we've allowed our employees to do is if you're the kind of person that likes to work early in the morning and late at night, then that's what you get to do. You don't have to all start at 8 o'clock. If you want to work a few hours in the morning, great, and then have the rest of the midday to take care of just everyday work life, home balance, then that's great. And then you can work again at night. And so it's become very, I guess employees have taken ownership of getting their own work done. And so that has been a shift. For the hourly team that can't work from home, we've staggered the department start time. And so we have different departments starting at different times. So that way we're reducing the public interaction with people leaving and entering our facilities. We've also just recently started hoteling. And so this is where employees have decided to just work from home permanently. And so their office is now available. And so for those individuals that want to come into the office, need to come into the office for, Becca's comment, there's some things you physically have to be at the winery to do. These individuals can go online, sign up and reserve a room, an office, to work for a day or a couple of days. And that way they get the benefit of working on site, but they get to spend the majority of their time at home.
So, Becca, you kind of mentioned some of the things earlier, but do you have anything else you want to add on additional stressors that you're seeing and how you're specifically addressing them?
I don't think so. I think everybody really touched on what's happening right now, and it's not fun. So.
No. Sadie, what about you? What are some stressors? You had tragic experience in your group, and I'm sure that was very impactful on your staff.
Yeah, absolutely. So the gentleman that passed away had been a supervisor in our company for a lot of years. He was actually one of the original people who helped plant the vineyard in 1997. And so initially, that was obviously really stressful on the whole crew, all the people who'd worked with them, all the management, all of us. It was really hard. And I think it brought up a lot of awareness, how the Latino community has to operate. And we're really lucky that we can work from home. I mean, I'm a farmer, I can't necessarily, but a lot of us can. And vineyard workers, they have to be there or they don't get paid. And so one of the big stressors was trying to figure out ways to keep people home and still make money. With Latino workers, not necessarily everybody that I hire is eligible for unemployment. I assume everybody I hire is legal. They have all the documents to hire, but I don't actually know what their personal status is and if they can get unemployment or not. And then we ran into a lot of just roadblocks with, we had a sick person in the workplace, and how many people were around that person, and who had to stay home in quarantine. So immediately it was identifying people who should stay home. And our operation is in Oregon, but a lot of our staff are in Washington. So what we were running into is Oregon was telling me I couldn't tell which people should stay home in quarantine. But Washington was a little easier to work with. So we just took the stance that we were going to take the Washington approach. And so basically we worked hard to find ways to get tests to people who were potentially exposed, because
we had 41 participants. So we have 30 right now. I would like to just wait a minute, before we start again. And Sadie, that gives you time to regroup what your thoughts were there.
I was going hard there too.
Or we just go to the next question. So we'll dive into the field and farm questions here next. So we have about 10 more people. Let's just give it exactly 1 minute and see if they can get back on. Julie, are you able to send an email out to everybody just to say, reply to the registration list? Okay, thank you. I'm gonna type. All right. So oh, there was one last question. So David, are you able to unmute and we can hear you?
Yep, I am here. Hi.
Okay. All right. So I want to ask you then one stressor. So it's 103 in Prosser. What about masks? And you, when we talked earlier, you said there was some new guidance coming from LNI about heat stress and masks. So that is definitely a stressor for workers right now.
Yeah, so there's on the LNI website, and we can provide the link to everybody after it's done if they don't know where that link is. But in the Q&A regarding masks, there's a little section on agriculture and specifically talking about heat stress. Now, I want to be careful with what I say because what they're saying is that the cloth face covering by itself is not going to make somebody overheat or cause heat stress or one of the heat conditions. It certainly is a contributing factor. It has to be. If it's 103 out and you put an additional piece of cloth on your face, it's going to be a factor in heat stress. But by itself, it's not going to cause heat stress. So they're really kind of downplaying the fact that wearing a cloth face covering should not be a huge impact as heat stress goes. Heat stress is going to be an issue regardless of whether you're wearing a cloth face covering or not. And if you put that in the context of, if you're out working in a field and it's really dusty, a lot of the practice would be to put on a bandana or something to that effect because you didn't want to have to deal with the dust. So, using like a cooling type bandana or a face gaiter, while maybe not as effective as a cloth mask, is still an option. I was trying to see if I brought one down. I had there's a company that makes it's a cooling neck gaiter that I've been recommending to construction workers and to agriculture workers, that if you just need a cloth face covering, it's maybe not as effective as a mask, but it's still better than nothing, and it still meets the requirement of being a cloth face covering. So that would be my option. So what I will do is I think we'll provide the information to people that they can go and they can look at that mask Q&A and see the questions that have been asked specifically related to heat stress, and then we can kind of go from there. I mean, I realize what it says is, you're not going to be able to use that as an excuse for heat stress. Heat stress is going to be an issue whether a mask is involved or not. So follow the heat stress protocols regardless and no matter what. And that's frequent breaks, lots of water, and just following the normal guidelines. So hopefully that's at least a little helpful.
Okay. Thank you. So there's a question that came in specifically addressed to Sadie, but then I just want to follow up with a little bit of what David said. At the end of this, we have a resource sheet that we'll be sending out, and we'll make sure that we get that link on there. And then David, if Sadie misses a institution in this question, please chime in. But Sadie, the question was really about which agencies are you getting your guidelines for with PPE and changes in the work environment?
That's all through like Oregon, the various Oregon institutes. That's kind of hard for me. Let's see. Who is it? It's like OSHA has some stuff. I mean, and then you all know we're getting inundated with emails and information. So basically I'm just taking all of that information and compiling it. So, but I think the main big player is probably OSHA, Oregon OSHA.
Jim, you're shaking your head. Who are you all getting and following which regulations?
Well, I agree with Sadie. Certainly for our Oregon operations, we're turning to Oregon OSHA. And then we're also looking to see if the counties that we operate in, if the health departments in those counties have anything additional, because that's what we're seeing here in Washington. Certainly, you follow the state guidelines that are coming from the governor's office, and you're following LNI. But if you also go to the county level, the health departments are having very specific information that we found helpful for some of our operations.
Okay.
Hey, Gwen. So this is really interesting, and I guess I want to point this out because this is a unique situation, and not that I'm not saying anything disparaging. I'm just saying with this current situation, this is just really different for all of us. And Jim really touched on it. And everyone in the state of Washington, including LNI and the Department of Health, every direction is coming from the governor's office. And so a lot of times we will hear something when the governor goes on TV and does a press conference. And then we find out after the fact, oh, and by the way, LNI, you're going to enforce this. And then we're scrambling to go, because under normal situation, when there's any kind of a rule or anything that employers have to follow, we as the department are really involved in developing that rule and making sure that people understand, educating employers, helping them understand so that they can be in compliance with whatever it is that's coming out. In this situation, we're not part of that process. Everything that is coming down as far as a requirement or a new rule or a new requirement is coming from the governor's office. And then we're just kind of having to deal with it and help people figure it out. So that's why it's really important from my standpoint that everybody understand that from a labor and industries perspective, we want to make sure that we get it. We know you're trying to figure it out. We're trying to figure it out too, and let's do it together. And we will make sure that we keep you in compliance and out of trouble, essentially, as we try to navigate all of these things, because we don't want to hurt anybody. We don't want to penalize anybody. We want to be a partner and help you guys figure out how to do this right and just keep everybody safe and keep everybody from getting the coronavirus, essentially. And that's going to take really a team effort. So that's really, from our standpoint, what is important that we let employers know.
Good, thank you. And again, we'll put out a resource sheet with some links to different websites for you all. So let's move into how you're changing harvest operations, and then we'll go into winery operations. So Sadie, you are, if I'm not mistaken, 100% hand harvest. How specifically are you changing harvest operations and crew management for hand harvest?
So we've weighed a lot of options, and initially one of the things that we were looking into was, right now our crews pick into buckets and then they dump into larger bins, and we pick in small groups of people. So we had considered renting lugs and then trying to like go back in, and so picking in the lugs, go back in, pick them up. And then ultimately what we ended up deciding is we're probably not going to change harvest a whole lot in the sense of how we pick, but we are going to enforce things differently. So we're going to pick with 4 small groups of people. There'll be about 6 to 8 people in each group. And then each group will work behind a tractor. And we're going to just encourage social distancing and then mask wearing. And, I was worried about asking the crew to wear masks during harvest, but you know what? They already wear coverings on their face anyway. Like somebody mentioned earlier, they were always kind of wearing masks even before this started. So we'll be still picking with that many people in a row. We're going to do it more spread out, and then we're going to enforce not gathering around the bins when they dump the fruit. And our way of doing this, we have a few things in mind. We're going to pay more this harvest. We think if we can use that as an incentive to like work a little bit slower and then work, follow the directions really well. You're still going to get paid by the pound. We're going to pay you more. You'll probably make more money. And then anybody not following directions is going to miss the next day of work. So basically, if we catch you not social distancing, if we catch you breaking the rules around the bin, so we're not like all congregated in one area or people working too close together, you'll get a verbal warning, and then the next day you'll have to stay home. And we're going to have 2. So right now we have like 1 COVID officer. It's one of the Oregon requirements. We're going to have 2 COVID officers during harvest. We're going to have 1 person who stays with 2 picking groups and another person who stays with the other 2 picking groups. And then those picking groups will be working in close proximity, essentially to each other, so that COVID officer can keep a close eye on things.
Okay, so I'll let people ask specific questions if they want, Sadie, but we're going to go on to machine harvest as well. So Jim, what are some things that you are considering for machine harvest and ways to deal with it during COVID?
Well, I was going to speak to hand picking.
Oh, good.
And so, Julie, if you could pull up the picture of the hand picking operation. So here, just like Sadie was describing, you've got a tractor with a macro bin, and you've got employees working the row and then dumping into the bins. And I agree, our practices across all of our vineyards have been, 6 to 8 typically would be on a hand picking crew. And so we are looking at that differently this year. And so certainly, and for some of our California vineyards, we're looking at breaking those in half. And so we're, that's just building on the pod philosophy of dividing your workforce into smaller groups so that the impact from quarantining and isolation are reduced. And so we're looking at, you're doubling your tractor work, but we're breaking them into smaller groups. For our Oregon and Washington, we're also evaluating how we can do hand pick in smaller groups. It does seem like face coverings are going to be required, but as the other speakers have shared, that's not uncommon for harvest in the vineyards. So face coverings required, making them smaller groups. The other issue that we've had is the size of the buckets. And so, once again, historically, a full bucket is 40 pounds, plus or minus. And we're looking at changing that. Some of our vineyards have already changed this in the past, but we're going to buckets that are 25, 30 pounds. And why we can see a benefit from that is that they're easier for most of the employees to lift. If you're doing this for hours on hours on hours every day, you think 40 pounds isn't a lot. Do it all day. It's a lot. And so just dropping it down, 10, 15 pounds, they're able to lift it into the bins easier, because what we were having is you'd have congestion at a bin. If several people were coming to the bin at the same time with their buckets, someone might not be able to lift it the full height. And so now I've got someone else stepping in, helping, which is what you want. But that in today's world, now I've got two people literally standing, face to face. And so we're looking at if we can make the buckets a little bit smaller at some of our operations, employees will be able to lift it by themselves. We feel our sanitation protocols for the buckets are sufficient. So the fact that someone might be handling someone else's bucket, we don't see that as a risk because we're cleaning our buckets on a regular basis. The employees are, wearing gloves, at least in one hand. And then the practice is they have to wash at breaks and lunches. And so once again, we feel that can be covered. But absolutely, hand picking is the one thing in the vineyard that will have to be looked at carefully as it pertains to COVID. But that's a segue into machine picking. And so Julie, if you pull up the picture of a machine picking.
Just a moment if you want to get started, and I will pull that one up.
In a second here, you'll see a picture. So even if a tractor, most of our tractors are enclosed, but not all. So even if the tractor is not enclosed, it's a one-person operation. So it's one tractor per implement. And so you've got one tractor pulling the harvester down a row, and then you've got another tractor pulling the bin down an adjacent row. So it's two individuals, they're in their own tractor, they're separated by a row. And so once again, we looked at that and didn't see that as a risk in complying with the social distancing requirements that are being asked. And so as you can see here with this picture, we feel that this should be fine. Now we'll have to, look at other activities happening in the vineyard. So obviously we can't congregate and have group lunches, but we've already implemented that through the whole spring already, is that everyone isolates for breaks and lunches. So not a whole lot of changes we see for machine picking, at least grapes.
So David, machine picking is primarily a task done alone. Are there any other regulations that need to be considered when a task is done alone like that? In sanitation in between people?
Yeah, so that was kind of what we had talked about, and this is what we're finding in agriculture and the construction industry, where you have a piece of equipment that maybe has an enclosed cab or may have a change in operators, and that is just simply disinfecting between operators per the CDC guidelines, just using the right disinfectants, and Faith can probably talk a little more about that and what that might specifically be, but that would really be our only requirement, is just that you disinfect between operators when you're talking about a piece of equipment that people are touching or those commonly touched surfaces.
Great, and I'll go ahead and tag on here and say that, you know, if anyone has questions around how they pick a disinfectant and how that's different, know that it is different than what you may have been using for your sanitizer in the past. And with disinfectants in general, we're getting a lot more kill of our target organism. Also, you've never been targeting an organism like this in the past for your sanitization practices. So the EPA List N is going to be our go-to list for determining what EPA pesticide products, aka our chemical sanitizers, are effective against this exact virus. In the list of resources that Gwen will send out, we will link to that EPA List N, as well as a video tutorial where you can walk through and be able to ascertain if your compounds that you're currently using for sanitization may be completely effective. And they may still do the job. You may need increased concentrations or increased contact times to achieve these new objectives of disinfecting. But it's highly likely that they may be already on that list. And even if not on that list, there's ways for you to evaluate that. So know that that's a really good resource if you have questions. The only thing that doesn't cover are what we call pesticide devices. And so one that I know is in high demand now are UV lights. They are not covered within that same sort of documentation, but know that that supplier should be able to provide you scientific studies to show what you need as far as exposure levels go to those devices to achieve an activation. Your target organism is going to be coronaviruses. It's a big family of viruses. It's most likely not going to be specific for the actual viruses causing COVID, but it's going to be, your best bet for knowing that this practice, exposing at UV light for this long a period of time, will inactivate this family of viruses.
Faith, while you're on it, what recommendations do you have for people? So they're out in the field, they need to sanitize hand washing stations, common areas, water stations. What are your recommendations?
Yeah, so I would lean on using something that is already, you've already sourced, right? Because I still think some people are running into trouble if they're trying to use something different than what they've sourced in the past, and knowing about nuances to compatibility and things along those lines. So a really great example would be a lot of people are turning to ethanol-based sanitizers. Well, ethanol on some of our plastics are going to make them hazy, and you're not going to be able to see through them for very long. So disinfecting something like a tractor cab would be, maybe not a good thing if all of a sudden your plastic that you see through is not going to, like on your dashboard, it's not going to work very well. I would then say to set up, the thing that I think people struggle with the most is the frequency that they now have to adhere to, and really try and, you've already heard some really great examples, but really try and strategically think through, can you take away any of these high touch points by changing your system, right? And by doing so, then you decrease that frequency of disinfecting that will need to take place per, the guidelines that are out there. And if they can't be taken away, then you're probably going to have to put people on that task that has never been their role in the past, right? Because this has never been a need. So knowing that that's going to be something, again, that's needs to be purposeful, and it's not just going to be easily picked up by someone. If it's no one's job, then it's definitely not going to get done.
Okay, so we have a little bit more than half an hour, but only a couple minutes more. And I really want to ask some questions on getting into the winery side of it. Becca and Jason, how specifically are you changing your harvest operations at the winery? So let's start with you, Becca.
So scheduling is a big change. Our break room is only so big, and we have to evaluate, okay, how many people can we have in there? So when do they start? So shifts and work groups are staggered, extremely staggered. It's so different. And that's going to take more work and enforcement and making sure people take their breaks on time. If you want to, Julie, if you want to pop up one of the outdoor break room picture I have, we actually borrowed this idea from Cherry Harvest. So I'm sure you guys have seen restaurant photos like this, but we took that idea, and I'd actually like to bring that inside as our next step. So can you switch to the next picture, the indoor break room? So you can see here we've taped off 6 feet, and it's really severely limited our break room capacity. And that place gets cleaned all the time. And you also have to make sure people are following the rules while sitting in the break room. So staggered shifts, I think fruit will have to be more regulated. I've been talking to our clients for the past few months about regulating the fruit flow so we don't have huge peaks and valleys like we have in the past, where we have had to cross shifts. We just won't be able to do that. We shouldn't do that to avoid people working together in a large group. What else? I think that's it. Staggered shifts and the break room, that's gonna be a big one.
That was a good picture. So 2 good pictures. And Sadie, I was told you have a good picture that we'll come back to at the end to just show how you're separating everybody in the field. We had that little technical blip there for a minute. So Jason, what are you specifically doing on how you're trying to change your operation for grapes coming in and through the first steps of winemaking?
Our biggest challenge to start was we've actually isolated all aspects of the business. So if someone gets sick on the retail side, they don't come anywhere near admin or winemaking. And so we literally have controlled access doors, and they're locked. So it's kind of like a reminder, hey, if you're about to cross this barrier, you shouldn't. And everyone's been very, very good about that. Our biggest concern is interns coming in. We have a small winemaking team. It's only 4 of us. During harvest, that goes up to 10 as we bring on a lot of people to help sort fruit, et cetera. So we've talked about it as a group. I'm kind of borrowed this from Becca. We'll sit down and when all the interns get together and talk about specifically what face coverings people are comfortable with. Some people have said, you want one with a filter. I don't know, you can't control people. I think this has been mentioned. You can't control people when they're outside of the winery. So I'll have to give them a little pep talk about, hey, you're going to be tired anyway. Maybe you just want to go sit on the couch. Obviously, everyone's been experiencing this pandemic, so hopefully they just come home and come back. We talked about maybe trying to stagger shifts, but kind of the size that we are, we really can't do that. We're kind of all hands on deck all at once, kind of a normal work day. The biggest challenge for us is actually going to be trying to find a break room because it gets pretty terrible over here come October. So hopefully we have a good piece of property that we're on with lots of picnic benches. It's going to be easy in August and September. But what do we do come October when it's rainy and cold out? Is sort of the bigger challenge. And in general, as a much smaller operation than Becca or Jim have got going on, we really need to make sure that people aren't hopping on and off of forklifts. It's one piece of equipment, one operator, period, end of conversation. If you have to go use the restroom, you full sanitize it, somebody else gets on it, and that probably that other person is going to stay on it for a couple of hours at that point. Same thing when you're filling barrels. It's often in teams. Digging out tanks are often in teams. Just, one piece of equipment, that's yours. One shovel, like nobody touches it, that's your shovel until you're done. But basically just understanding that we're going to be less efficient, and that there's a potential here for lower quality because we have to slow down. That we may have to stop just to get somebody tested. Like that is the nature of our future for a while. And I've actually gone the extra step. We're not really set up to receive machine harvested fruit. And I am bringing on, just for this season, I'm bringing in equipment that can handle machine harvested fruit with the intent that if we have to catch back up, then we can do that, refill the place. And same thing for the grower side. We understand that growers are going to, may not be as efficient, may need some help, may have whole crews go down, et cetera. We need to be able to sort of, to catch back up. I think that's all I got. Yeah, and everyone gets their own flashlight. Everyone gets their own pen. Do not share them.
Talk about some other touch points, Jason, that you talked about before on because you have a lot of touch points that you've already eliminated, which are really good. But you were talking about some struggles with the red fermenters and topping barrels where you've made some changes there.
Yeah, specifically for digging out fermenters, we don't break the plane, so we do it from the outside of the tank. So it's going to be easier for us than some other crews that may need to be in closer proximity. So it's basically, we know it's kind of going to just make it hard. Normally you would tag team a tank, take turns in between digging just so that you can catch your breath, but it might just be that we go slower now.
Becca, what are your thoughts on some touch points that you're eliminating or having to change?
What I'm most concerned about is tank digging, because we have 50-ton fermenters and normally there's 2 people in a tank, and we can't do that. I can't. We haven't figured it out fully yet, honestly. And I think that's going to be a big pinch point during harvest, and we're going to slow down. And that's where I go back to eliminating our peaks and valleys during harvest. So maybe we only receive 6 red fermenters a day, and that's the way it is because that's how fast we can dig tanks. So that's one way we're talking about eliminating those touch points. But the other part is we're hiring more cleaning staff just to sanitize our touch points. We have so much handrail in our winery, it's not even funny. And in our SOPs, if you're carrying a bucket, you have to be holding the handrail. So that's safe, right? 3 points of contact. And yeah, we're going to be hiring people to clean that all the time.
So Faith, what does that mean for best? Because, in the regulations, it says sanitize often. What does often mean? How does Becca know that her often is often enough or maybe too often?
Right. And I think that in the guidelines that were put forth, within Washington, it specifies a startup, at first break, at lunchtime, an afternoon break, and then at completion. And if you have shift changeovers that kind of intermingle, right, then trying to also do it between those shift changeovers. And I think that Becca's exactly right. It's going to take what we've seen in other industries and other example crops. It takes hiring people in addition to those that you already have on board, because it is more of a dedicated job. Just when you look at your square footage, based upon your size and complexity, there's not enough free time that anyone's going to have, especially when you look at other confounding factors, like maybe we're doing something as a single person that would normally be a team event, and therefore we're even spread more thin than we would be normally. and taking a little bit slower to do those things. So those are specifically the times that I would think of whenever you have people moving, just normally through break and food events, entering and exiting the building. And then some people have even stepped it up to basically, the most aggressive I've seen is, by no means is this like the bar you have to meet, but, on an hourly basis, they're trying to hit all of their highest risk touch points that they feel. So handrails, doorknobs that are highly in those really high traffic areas. And then everything else has been trying to hit it at that frequency or around basically breaks and start work, ending of work.
Okay. So I want to bring this next question. It was sort of a similar question that was asked to both the growers and winemakers. So I'll ask it a little bit. And I know Becca and Jason, you covered it a little bit. But the question is what concerns are you going to have about the pace for Jim and Sadie, the pace of harvest? And can you give specific examples of how you're preparing to address for this? And then Becca and Jason, what's the pace of accepting grapes? And is there anything else other than that someone could do other than communicate, which is a huge step, right? But do you have concerns, and what are you guys specifically doing about that? And then before, Sadie, I'm going to ask you maybe to start, but because I'm going to see if Julie will pull up the picture that you provided of the nice, how you had everybody separated during harvest while you're looking at that, answering the question.
Oh yeah, so that's actually just a picture of us working this year. One of the early things we did this year was have people work in every other row. And we know that like one row is 9 feet apart. But here we just went kind of the extra mile to keep people further apart. And then our current rule is when we're working, and if we have to work even in just one person per row, is you can take your mask off once you're in your row, but when you're out of your row, you have to put it back on. And then any time where people might like get closer than 6 feet. So harvest is going to be super interesting because typically we can pick 10 acres a day. And so I've always just capped it kind of when we're picking at 10 acres a day, and that tonnage can vary, if it's cab, it's 30 tons. If it's, Sangio and Merlot, it might be 40 or 50 tons. So we're going to this year go down to 8 acres per day. We have probably just a little bit, sorry, you guys, I'm in somebody else's office and the printer's printing. So, at 8 acres a day, the harvest is just going to be slower. We know that, and it's going to take a lot of communication and planning and communicating with wineries. I sell grapes to about 50 different wineries each year. But because of COVID, we're picking a little bit less this year. And then I also think Mother Nature's going to work on our side. The crops are lighter this year. If you've been out in the vineyard, I'm sure I'm not alone in this. Other people have seen it. So with a little bit less crop, with a little bit less to pick, I'm hoping that 8 acres a day works. If 8 acres a day is keeping people socially distanced, wearing their masks, and it's going really well, I might bump it up to 9 acres a day. But once again, it's going to be communication, telling the winemakers to be patient and planning ahead. And like Becca said, removing those peaks and valleys. People they're going to call me and they're going to want to pick. And if I'm full at 8 acres a day, they might be a little bit grumpy, but that's going to help them plan ahead better on their next pick.
Jim, are you worried about operations being slower during harvest?
Yes, we're planning for it, and so it's starting in the vineyard. The concept of load leveling, and so it was mentioned earlier. In years past, you can have huge days where you're getting hundreds of tons in a single day, and then the following day you get half that. In today's world, that's going to create too much of a stress on the team and on the operations, so that we're working to load level all the way from the vineyard to the fermentation tank. But that, to your point, requires communication and coordination. Now you've got to coordinate with Sandy, with the pickers. You got to coordinate with your grape transportation. Your crush pad schedule has to be mapped out to receive. Am I receiving how many machine picked tons today, how many hand picked tons? And now your juice trucks. What kind of that schedule has to match. So there's going to be a lot of coordination that's going to have to happen to load level. but that will help create separation throughout the facility. In the cellars, you want to separate your tanks. Don't fill, in years past, we would just fill whatever tank based on the size needed. And I'm specifically talking about reds right now. And now we're going to be very thoughtful in which tank. And so it's almost, we're thinking about it as social distancing of fermentation. So it's going to be a checkerboard. You're going to move from tank to tank so that you're not filling tanks that are adjacent to each other. You're not draining tanks adjacent to each other. You're not doing pump overs on tanks that are adjacent to other. And when you're done, you don't have 4 crews digging tanks all next to each other. Everything's going to be spread out. And so we think it's with small things like that, we can create separation.
So Becca and Jason, let's start with Jason. What do you, are you concerned about the pace? Do you want to add anything else to what the comments you have already given and what specific things you're doing?
I'm concerned more about crews getting sick, vineyard crews getting sick. I think that will impact my speed just for the way our operation is. I tend to schedule picks 10 to 14 days out. So you've actually triggered for me that I need to check in with some of my principal growers, because normally what I do I'll just name a name at Ciel de Cheval, I know how much they can pick every day. And I just say, book me, plan on me picking, whatever it is, 8 or 10 tons on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If Kate has to back that number off, I need to check in with him so I can plan accordingly. But in general, it's like, I don't even know what block it's going to be. So we're very, very in front of it on the schedule side, which also allows me to set up the trucking a lot sooner as well. So I have my concerns, but I'm going to approach it just like harvest, always approach harvest, is you have plan A and plan B is that plan A will change. So again, just try to be gentle with one another and understand everyone's trying to fight their own thing. So I don't like to process every single day. We have a lot of small lots. So I think, that may be one item that changes for us, where we just get less efficient and I have to, clean up sorting equipment every single day. I lose a couple of man hours per day just to cleaning stuff up. But I know other than that, it kind of a little bit extra time. I'll come in early in the day and, make sure somebody from my full-time team sanitizes anything that could have been touched overnight, entry points, et cetera, and just have protocol, in place. When you're done managing caps, you've got to sanitize everything. Just, get off the lift, sanitize it, et cetera. So it'll just be a little bit less efficient. And the part I talked about was really like losing the potential for quality is going to be the fact that the winemaking teams can't taste together. It's got to be one person. That's it. Cannot have your mask off, like all standing around tasting something. So feel ironically kind of blessed. We've had 2 close calls, if you want to call it that, in the past month and a half or 2 months. We had like a kind of a sore throat virus go through that everyone came back negative for coronavirus. And then we had one person with a family member that tested positive. And the overall kind of response to that is, if we shouldn't have to wait for someone that has a secondary contact to come back negative, we need to be not considered in close contact in everything that we do. That's the only way that we're going to make it through harvest. So we just need to implement it, right now. So like I said, we've isolated from everybody. And I think there was a question in the Q&A I'll kind of touch on. I'm blessed in that the size of our org, we actually have a couple people that like to come in and help make wine. So I've just told them, hey, that's great. This year you get to help out by waiting in the wings until we all get sick. And then you're going to come in, and while, if one person on my team comes back with a positive, everybody leaves and goes and gets a test. Well, I have a couple people that are trained on how to manage caps, and that fruit will just sit there even if it's time to press it. We don't have anybody to press it off, but at least people can manage those caps for a couple of days, and I can rearrange schedules at that point. It tends to be kind of a community, and everyone at the Lowell wants to help, but you can't come in and spray out bins. You can't come in and sort fruit, like just 100%. It's the winemaking team taking the risk amongst themselves, and nobody here for fun. And none of your friends coming in to taste stuff. None of that's going to happen.
So Becca, do you want to add anything? We have 15 minutes left and we have two very specific worker questions that have come in. Are you worried or have anything else that you would like to add to how you're changing your operations for an expected slow harvest?
I guess it's more talking to the winemakers and coaching them into the idea that we need to pick on averages, and maybe not every block is ready, but when you're looking at the whole picture, what you get. Yeah, it's concerning and scary and a lot of unknown. And I also know how many tons a day we need to process. So talking to our clients and our winemaking team to make sure that happens.
Okay, so while you're unmuted, except you were fast, you remuted fast. So what is your plan for if someone either tests positive or has close contact with someone who tests positive? What do you do as a company?
Oh, all of our employees have been instructed to call HR, and if they're sick, they call into the sick line, and HR will contact them, help them find testing sites if they need to. And then the employer actually gets those test results too, so you know what's going on, and in theory when they're released back to work. So we do require doctors' information when they can come back to work. And then you are required to do contact tracing at work, but the goal is to not have any contact at work. And thankfully that's the position we've been in, thanks to our COVID police squad. It's exhausting, but when you have a couple cannonballs fired your way, you sure are thankful that that happened. And then in regards to if a family member or someone they were in contact with socially, our employees have been instructed, call the sick line, and once either you go get a test, or if that person tests negative, or it's all we need doctor's authorization to go back to work, pretty much.
So Jim, what are you all doing? How are you managing if someone either tests positive and or has a close relationship?
So we've written a response protocol, and it's based on a tiered system. And so someone that actually tests positive would be classified as a tier 1 incident. And that person is either sent home if we learn at home, or more often, we would anticipate someone calling and saying, hey, I can't come in because I've tested positive. So we would start the contact tracing, just like Becca. We would be using our HR team for that. And so that's going to identify the who's impacted. Then we're going to, based on that, we're going to assess the impact to the operations. Which facility was it? Which department in that facility was it? Based on that person, if it was, unfortunately, maybe a QI person that travels the whole winery, that would be unfortunate to happen versus, someone that is, maybe works a bottling line that just sits at this one workstation the whole time. So that's where we're identifying the impact to the operations. And then we start our cleaning. We've got a COVID response cleaning protocol. And so we would then move into whatever that area was and clean it. The nice thing about buildings and plants and equipment, once you've cleaned it, it's clean. And so you can put it back into use. It's really, the bigger impact is on your workforce. You can, as Jason was explaining, you can have other people come in once you've cleaned your equipment, and you can be back up and running. It's more of an impact on the person.
So Becca also mentioned, part of the goal in that contact tracing is that there is no contact, which helps. But Sadie, you did have someone who did test positive. One of the roles you are also supposed to do is work with the local county departments of health. And you are in an odd situation because you're crossing the border lines. How did you deal with that?
So working with the Oregon Department of Health was kind of terrible. And they basically told us we weren't allowed to do our own contact tracing, and we weren't allowed to say who should stay home and who shouldn't. Washington was, kind of encouraging people to stay home. So that's when we took the Washington approach that I brought up earlier. And that was a real eye-opening experience for us, because at that time, and keep in mind, this was like way back in April when all of this started, we still had a few people sharing vehicles. And so basically we ended up laying off about 6 people altogether, because 2 separate sick people who lived together had shared vehicles with people. And so now, we took a no vehicle sharing approach. And really what we do when somebody tests positive is kind of our own internal tracing, or if somebody has any symptoms, or if they live with someone. So automatically, if you live with someone who tests positive, you have to stay home. You can't come to work. Oregon is very much against this protocol of ours. The health department called me and told me that I'm not allowed to say that, and that people should continue to go to work unless they have symptoms. So that's just really why we decided to take the quote Washington approach, because we felt like it was more fair for our Washington employees, and to give everybody fair treatment. That's the route we took. And so really, the question being, what do you do when somebody tests positive? I think you do whatever you can do to protect all your employees. If you have to tell somebody to stay home, have them stay home, have them get a doctor's note, because then you can pay them through the FFCRA, things like that. Find a way, if they're not a regular employee, to pay them to stay home so they're not hiding their symptoms from you and continuing to come to work to make money. And then do your own contact tracing if you can, if you're comfortable, and then figure out, who did that person have close contact with, and should that person stay home, or should they just be hyper aware of maybe how they're feeling and things like that.
Okay, so I'm going to ask another question that came in through the Q&A, and to be honest, you all decide if you can answer it or not. So have you changed any of your hiring practices? Are you asking any different questions during COVID? Is the first part of it. And then are you taking any other precautions for higher risk populations, or is it all standard? Everybody treated the same. So first start with the interview questions. So when you guys are interviewing interns, new employees, has anything changed?
I'll answer first, because we just froze all hiring, but I was really lucky that we had been in a situation where, are we both talking?
No, just you, Sadie.
I think things are freezing up. Sorry, guys. Okay, sorry, my screen froze up. So yeah, we just were able to freeze hiring, and we were really lucky that we had actually, up until like early March, we'd hired our biggest crew yet, and everybody has stayed on. So that question doesn't really apply to me. As for more vulnerable employees, a lot of my employees are the sort of 80s era Reagan Green card holders. There are a lot of older people that work for me. And so we're just encouraging them to, stay safe and don't go out and wear your mask in public and avoid those family reunions and things. And just really, it's about education and advocacy for them so they understand why they're at risk. And obviously my crew takes it really seriously, because we did lose somebody who was only 63 years old.
Becca, you have something to add?
Other than interviews being over Zoom or whatever platform, which sucks. Wow, that's hard. It's hard to get a feeling for a person digitally, but it's the same. And keeping, we're bringing up what we're doing to keep safe at work and how important it is. That's different. And other than that, legally, you can't not hire someone. It's up to them to take on the risk they want.
Yeah. So there's another question that came in, or that we talked about. So when people are coming to work, what's the type of screening that you're doing when they're coming into work? So Jim, you had a good answer.
Yeah, we have set up health screening stations. And so we're taking people's temperature, and then we're asking them the list of symptom questions We're also asking them if they are aware of having been in close proximity with anyone that has tested positive, or been around people that have tested positive. And if they pass that, then we ask them if they have a face covering. If they don't have one with them, we provide it there on the spot, and then they're allowed to come to work. And so we've now implemented that at all of our facilities.
So David, are there anything that anybody should be aware of on temperature screening and tracking people that people need to be aware of for actual regulation?
Yeah, the only thing is we don't want you to keep records of that. You don't have to keep records of temperature screening or that you've asked the screening questions of employees, because we've got some HIPAA issues going on there, and we don't want to create more paperwork for you. So simply, as long as you're doing the screening, and that's really a best practice thing more than it is a requirement, but it's part of your COVID plan, and really that's the bottom line, is have a plan, have somebody implementing your plan, and then just have procedures in place to keep your employees safe. And doing those, like just what Jim described, is perfect. And again, you don't have to keep records of that, but it's the best way to protect your entire staff and your employees, essentially.
I will add that we screen our employees in their car, so they don't have to even be close to anyone else. And that's a great way, a great touch point to see who's carpooling together and have a conversation about, hey, this is a bad idea. If you aren't household members, let's not carpool.
How are you protecting the people who are doing the screening? Because, when I looked at blueberry harvest, and it's probably the same as cherry harvest, to me, the weakest point were the people who are punching the tickets or weighing the buckets, because they saw every person, right? So Becca, what PPE are you doing, or how are you protecting the person doing the screening at the cars?
They are wearing gloves, masks, face shields, and they're keeping their distance, and all of our thermometers are touchless. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah. Jim or Jason or Sadie, do you have anything you want to add to any of that?
We're doing the same thing Becca's doing.
Okay.
We're more asking people to self-check before they get there. We'll have a thermometer available for people that don't have one at home. I do have one question for panelists, though. The one thing that came up when we were going through the questionnaire is, how do I ask the question about like muscle pain in the middle of harvest, right? I think everyone's going to come to work a little bit achy sometimes. So I don't want to not ask the question, but I guess if there's any suggestions about how to ask that question, I'd love it.
Unexplained muscle pain.
New muscle pain?
Yeah, new or unexplained muscle pain. Yeah, those.
Yeah. So the last question, because we only have a couple minutes left, but it was a really good question that came from someone, and it might be a little bit early. Maybe it's a good winter session for the wine grape growers meeting, but with change, there's always something good that comes out of it. And so far, have you implemented anything that's working better now that you might continue even after COVID? You have some smart listeners today.
I love that people don't come to work with a cold anymore. I haven't had a cold since I don't remember, knock on wood. Generally, I think our staff, they're healthier, they're washing their hands more, and we just know if you're sick, even though it might not be COVID, like, don't come. We don't want you. Go get better.
I agree. I love that. What about you, Sadie? Anything?
I think the one just really cool thing that's happened this year is we had a really big crew in the beginning of the year, and then I haven't had people leave to go pick cherries, to go pick asparagus, to do other crops. And so because I've had a bigger crew this year, we've collectively worked less hours than we've ever done. I mean, like individually, collectively, You know, we're not here 6 days a week like we normally were. We're getting by with like 8-9 hour days, 5 days a week, and everybody has great attitudes and it feels really refreshed. So I think for me, it just brings the attention to how important it is to have a steady crew who doesn't bounce around, that's here year round. And then it pays off in the long run because you're working less hours, people are less exhausted. So pay them more to keep them year round. It's been amazing. I've never had this much downtime in the summer and spent so much time with my kids.
Well, you might see them more in the fall too.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. So Jason, what about you? Anything that is a positive out of this situation?
I obviously echo what everyone has said about keeping people home. We've also made sure that seasonal people have PTO available right away so that that's not a barrier for staying home. And I think one of the things that probably will end up coming out of this is that in all aspects of the business, I think we were running pretty lean, and as a small business or medium-sized business compared to some of the wineries, you ask people to wear a lot of hats, and we're starting to realize just we're kind of running pretty lean. You know, what do you do in a situation like this when and if someone gets sick? So in some areas, we're still trying to find improvement. My wife has been attached to her laptop. She works for a company as well. There's nobody that can do her job if you know she can't take any vacation. So that's one of the things we're starting to recognize. And I think you know, I shouldn't admit this, but we're kind of excited about not having 6 people on a sorting table. Our growers all do an amazing job when they hand harvest to keep in MOG out. So I think we often have some harvest interns that just gravitate to the easiest job, and now I can tell them, hey, you know, I can only have like 3 people on there safely. So, you know, go find something else to clean. But and along that line, we didn't touch on it, but I'll have plastic, like plexiglass partitions. So like when we're hand sorting whites, or generally when it's kind of most vigorous for us. So we'll have partitions at least in between people. So we'll be separated there. I haven't figured out how to say like, that's my bucket, don't touch my bucket for juice, but we'll figure that out the next month.
I think my cellar master and I just came up with an idea. We're going to issue everyone fanny packs with their flashlights and a pack of pencils and all the little tools that we all touch and shouldn't.
Yeah, we're on the search for like little spray bottles that you can put on your belt. It's easy enough to have a lot of alcohol around to spray off valves and you know, sample valves and stuff like that, but just the amount of time that, you know, you just touched something somebody else did, like just little thing of hand sanitizer on all times. It just become a habit.
Becca, your crew's gonna look super cool with fanny packs around. I would like to see what design you pick out for that. So Jim, what's a positive from this that you might take away?
Just the new work environment. So the fact that we've learned which jobs you can work from home, that's really made some of our employees that are lucky enough to have that job really, really happy. And so we've decided as a company to continue that practice even after the pandemic. And we've also learned that separating, there's a lot of benefit to really looking at your process flow and keeping different groups, you know, based on the pod concept, separated. And so we are realizing efficiencies by doing it that way. And so we absolutely won't go backwards from those improvements.
Good. So Faith, I just want to get to these last 2 folks here, and then I think we're going to be done. We lost a little time in the collapse and coming back, but Faith, what do you hope as a good positive take home?
Yeah, I think people are going to be way more attuned to sanitizing surfaces in general, which I would be all, yeah. And I have never seen people wash their hands in earnest like I have so I'm hoping that those things stay around, right? Because they're all going to help us in the long run. And yeah, I think that it's a great thing if people can keep on thinking about this, because it's a way to both keep your equipment, you know, like without having spoilage organisms be introduced and things that you don't want coming into the mix, as well as, you know, keeping your employees safe by, you know, keeping this kind of on your radar, because it's also going to help for any other cold and nasty thing that comes along in future. So I think it's nice having those high touch points now on your master, you know, schedule for, you know, actually getting disinfected.
All right, David, last one.
Last one. Well, I don't know if you can, now you can see my dogs in the background. They're super happy that I've been home a lot. But it's ball time right now, so they're just waiting for me to finish up so that they can go out and play in the kiddie pool and chase their balls. Boy, you know, I'll tell you, I would echo what Becca says. I'm super glad. I'm getting way less sick now with everybody wearing masks and doing a lot of social distancing. So that's been a positive thing. I think, I guess really quickly, and I know we're running out of time, but I want people to understand. So if you think of what we do at L&I, and we're DOSH, and we're the Washington equivalent of OSHA, and there's two sides of the house. There's compliance and there's consultation. And consultation is my side, and then compliance is the other side of that. And, you know, consultation is proactive. We help employers when they ask for it. Compliance is reactive. There are only a few times where compliance is going to come out to visit your site. And that is if you have an employee that's hospitalized for some reason, or if there's a complaint from an employee or a referral from the public saying that they saw something unsafe. Those are the times when L&I compliance is going to show up to your facility. So what's critically important, I think, and it sounds like everybody, especially of the panelists, and I think everybody in this industry is generally really good at this. It's the relationship with your employees, with the people on your team, that is critically important, because it's when they call L&I and complain that we have to come out and do a compliance investigation. So the better your relationship is with your core employees and your team, and saying, hey, if you feel unsafe or if there's a problem, please come to me and tell me so that I can solve the problem for you, and you don't feel like you have to call L&I and complain and start an investigation. That is just so critically important. And again, I think it really sounds like everybody that I've dealt with, you know, from WSU to the blueberry and raspberry and wine growers, and we've got something coming up with the Potato Commission, hopefully here soon as well. Everybody's super good about doing that, and there's very much this family feel. So keep up with that, and just keep that relationship with your employees strong.
Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah, but I really want to thank all of you for meeting with us ahead to go over some of these questions, and for the participants for sending in some questions, and those of you that logged back on after our blip. So thank you. And Sarah? So
yes, well, again, thank you very much. Apologies for the interruption today. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our moderator. Thank you to those that attended and joined and asked questions. Please go out and share this information. I think one of the key pieces of this webinar is we don't have all the answers, but in talking with everyone, with our colleagues, with our fellow industry members, we can gain some innovative, creative solutions. So keep talking to each other about this. If you think of questions today that you did not get an answer, if you think of questions that you did not get answered today, feel free to email me at Sarah, S-A-R-A, at wawinegrowers.org. And we will be making this webinar recording available in the coming days. So look for that. If you want to review it again, or if you know someone that you can share it with, please feel free to do so. Beyond that, on behalf of Washington State University and Washington Wine Growers Association, thank you and goodbye.